You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hi folks, I'm your host, Teresa Tang. I want to start off with a little exercise this week. Okay, listen to these two sounds and notice which one makes you smile more. Here's the first one. And here is option 2. Well, if you chose option 2, you're not alone. People in China are increasingly choosing fur babies over human babies. And it's not just couples. Seniors, too, are picking pets as companions as they age. I wanted to learn more about this growing trend and the multi-billion-dollar industry attached to it. So I've asked CNA's Shanghai Correspondent Tan Yew Guan to join me today. Hi, Yew Guan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I didn't have any furry pets growing up. We had turtles, we had frogs, but nothing that was allowed to roam the house freely. Most of my Asian friends didn't have pets either. Culturally, for my parents, the idea of raising an animal inside the home was just not accepted. But it seems like that notion has really changed in a generation. For you, what do you think has been the main driver of that shift in China?
I've been to China a couple of times for filming trips, and now I live here. Although I have not lived here for very long, I do think that the culture in China runs somewhat to a very different beat to, say, overseas Chinese. You must recall that, none of us ethnic Chinese overseas have experienced things like the Cultural Revolution. And people around me have parents who have experienced that, right? But it's also not true, that said, it's also not true that it's a Chinese cultural thing not to have pets. After all, Confucius himself had a dog. Apparently he loved his dog, right? Or at least that's what I read. And not sure about my family, but I think in my case, for my parents, I think it's more of a case of migrant communities being a bit more frugal, and therefore they think that pets are seen as an unnecessary luxury. So I guess it's not so much a cultural thing, but more an economic thing. It's more of a case of whether a family can afford to have an extra mouth to feed. Or at least that's true for recent Chinese history, because the minute China got rich, it went back to having dogs as pets.
That's a really good point. In August, your assignment was to attend Pet Fair Asia, a 5-day mega event that didn't aim to sell animals per se, but it looked at trends. It brought vendors together. I read about it, Yew Guan, and what an event. Listen to these numbers. 2,500 exhibitors from all over the world. 250,000 visitors participated in the event as well. What was that like on the ground?
Pet Fair Asia not only occupied all the halls, it took up extra space in the center of the expo center, which had this open plaza. There, they set up like semi-temporary halls. So it was really that big. You really need a lot of energy to cover the entire expo.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you watch my story, they even have buggy shuttles to bring people from point to point. That's how big it was.
As you were speaking, all I could hear in my head was the sound of cash registers ringing because China's pet economy is worth a lot. Some estimate it was worth around $39 billion last year.
Well, yes, we all know the economic growth is kind of slowing globally. It's also slowing in China. I mean, for a country that used to have double-digit growth, it is felt pretty keenly, especially here in Shanghai. But the pet industry is about the only bright spot in all that gloom, you could say. It's a simple case of numbers, really. I recall one expert on social media saying that, to judge whether a property sector of a particular country would grow simply, you can judge it simply by whether their population is growing, right? And for that matter, the population in China isn't going to grow anymore, right? So therefore, the property sector isn't going to grow, right? Well, in the case of China's pets, the population is ballooning. So, of course, the pet sector is blowing up along with it. I spoke to a new friend of mine, Joey. He was saying that, he used to work in consultancy and he had access to all those numbers. And then he saw the pet population ballooning. So what did he do? Well, he went and set up his own pet business because 1, numbers are growing. 2, he's a pet lover himself. And so he knows what pet owners need. So here's Joey Yeo for you, co-founder and CEO of Hill Management Group.
The data that we're seeing is a huge increase in pet ownership over the years, and we're looking at double-digit growth. And for example, if I break down into dogs and cats ownership, we're seeing a year-on-year growth of 4% for dogs ownership, close to 20% for cats ownership, and we're talking about between 40 to 50 million of pets. A lot of potential in terms of opportunity for the pet industry. We are seeing an increasing trend in young couples, without kids, and also young professional singles owning a pet.
An increase in 20% cat ownership. Wow, that's amazing. And you spoke to a few pet owners who very much are investing their money into the health and happiness of their animals.
Investing? It's more like indulging, really. But before I really go into that, I think the 20% increase in cat population is pretty interesting. It was something I wanted to explore in my story, but I didn't really have screen time necessary. So, Teresa, what do you think there was such an explosion in cat population?
Oh man, I don't know. Maybe, compared to dogs, maybe cats, you don't have to walk them. They're happy at home, easier to take care of. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, you're pretty much on the right track. But there is an event that happened here which kind of made the cat population really take off in the last year or so. And that is really the COVID lockdowns. Because during the COVID lockdowns, those people who were living in tall apartments, which is a lot of urban Chinese, they realized they could not walk their pets and the pets were going crazy. And the dogs, they couldn't walk their dogs, right? And the dogs were going crazy. And it's only those with cats, that survive well, because cats can survive in your apartment, no problem. In fact, I even heard of people who just let their dogs out of the door because the dogs were going nuts, right? So that the dogs could walk themselves, right? And fortunately, some of them did come back. In fact, I do happen to know one of those pet owners who used to be a dog lover, right? And then she became a cat parent. Her name is Liu Yinghui. I think she's in her late 20s. She looks pretty young. She and her husband has 2 cats, and I recall a special reptile. But both of them really made sacrifices for their cats. For one, they have not opened their windows for over 1 to 2 years, right? Because they have not installed proper cat grills. And so they were afraid that their cats might jump out. And their place is air-conditioned 24/7. Just imagine the heating and cooling bills, right? The couple used to be avid travelers and also hasn't traveled for quite a while now because they aren't confident about pet hotels and frankly just couldn't bear to part with their fur kids. They married a couple of years ago and I asked her, wouldn't she want to enjoy the freedom of a life, or what the Chinese would call, 二人世界, which essentially means a world of two, right? And she says, after you know a person for too long and know a person too well, a relationship kind of can get stale, and the cats actually help bring variety and flavor to the relationship. The couples, you could see them with their cats. They really had a lot of love to give. Now, with the pets, they don't seem to want to have kids anymore. So here's Liu Yinghui, pet parent to kittens, Tracy and Gary.
Our generation has little desire to have kids, and pets do provide companionship and fulfill part of the functions that kids perform. Rearing a cat is almost like raising a child. You will see things you want to buy for them and forget the prices. So long it's good for them, I will buy.
Your report, it brought up the healthcare industry, and that has evolved around aging pets, the care that they need as they get older. I found this so interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. It's something I can relate to already. Frankly, I'm no longer spring chicken. I do need things like physiotherapy, orthopedic specialists, a lot more than when I was, say, in my 30s. It's the same with pets, when they reach their 20s, which essentially means they're senior citizens, right? And a lot of the pets here are reaching that age band, right? The reason is because in the late 2000s and in the early 2010s, right, is when the pet population in China really ballooned, skyrocketed, right? So now many of those pets are what we consider senior citizens. So like humans, they need physiotherapy and other health services normally associated with, say, elderly folks, which is kind of like me in time to come. I hope not, but yes.
When my family goes on long holidays, we often ask a neighbor or a friend to house sit for us. But if you have a pet, that really poses some challenges. You can't just leave them to fend for themselves. And I know dog hotels, they've been around for a while now, but you looked into a new trend called commercial pet clubs that have mushroomed in cities across China. How do they work?
That's right. These pet commercial clubs, they help pet owners bring their pets to travel, really. I hope your listeners get to see that story on YouTube. It's kind of cute. You see, a lot of these places, shopping malls, cafes and stuff like that, some of them don't really welcome animals because of the alleged noise, urine, etc. But it's not always true, of course, if the owner is a responsible pet owner, right? But the discrimination kind of gets stuck in many people. Although it's improving in Shanghai, we do see pet-friendly places quite a bit. In fact, just opposite me is one of those malls which welcome pets. But still, a lot of places don't. So some of these clubs, they pop up to help owners bring their pets out instead of being stuck at home all the time. So they do this in two ways. One, of course, they help facilitate the pets to go out. Another way is that actually they educate the pet parents on how to, make sure that their pets do not mess up the place and how to behave and stuff like that, like some obedience training and stuff like that. So it's two-pronged, right? At a pet expo, my assistant, Jackie, she bumped into this one such group from Qingdao, right? It's actually a pet commercial club, right? And according to the president of that club, members of that club pay up to $42 for club fees and an additional $420 to join a tour, because they were on tour from Qingdao to Shanghai, right? And that's for one owner, one pet, with room and tours included. But it's a self-drive tour from Qingdao to Shanghai. They also go to many other places around China, as well as within Qingdao itself. I believe the president said they even went to the movies once. But all of that is within China, right? No planes involved, no self-drive, no passports, no customs, none of that, right? That wasn't enough for one particular pair of pet lovers though. So what they did was they formed their own club, and in pretty much Star Trek fashion, they boldly gone where no one has gone before. They organized a pet tour all the way to Thailand. I cannot even begin to fathom how they even thought this was possible. I mean, we all know about pet quarantine, all those procedures to bring pets from one country to another, but they managed to overcome all of that and bring a bunch of pets across customs as if they're humans.
Wow.
But it's not without overcoming a lot of obstacles. Here's Xavier Xia, co-founder of Baby Go, a pet tour agency of sorts.
I believe this is the world's first chartered flight for pet travel. Animal tests and quarantine at customs are a major hurdle, particularly for so many animals at one time. We need to conduct those tests way before departure. Now that includes the same procedures in Thailand, where we've communicated with Thai authorities to facilitate quicker custom clearance for more than 20 pets, which takes about 2 minutes processing time per pet. Although Thailand is a pet-friendly country, it's difficult to host such a big tour.
So now Xavier's idea is kind of taking off because he posted on social media, and the South Korean authorities kind of saw it, tourism authorities, and they approached him, right? And they asked him whether he could organize a tour to South Korea. So that could be their next destination, right? Seoul.
I can totally see this trend of group travel with pets picking up in other parts of the world, not just China. And our editor, Clara, she has a cat named Ginger. I'm sure she'd love to get on one of these tours. Okay, so people really spending on their pets, but Yew Guan, does it translate into a bigger impact on the Chinese economy as a whole?
It's hard to say. During the recent mid-year online shopping festival, overall sales dropped 6.9%, but revenues of pet food went up 10%. Imagine that. But that said, okay, I'm not an economist, I must say, right? But the property sector used to be a huge chunk of the Chinese economy. So they do have a lot of ground to cover in order to cover that hole. So even though internal consumption is one of those things that authorities have been hoping to boost, and given that, the population is kind of aging and shrinking, you could say in the long run, the property sector is on its way down, right? Whereas on the other hand, you have a higher pet population, which is kind of a way to boost consumption. But that said, it's still a very long way off to equal property sales, because property was such a huge chunk of the economy. So the size alone, I really don't think that the pet economy would grow to a size that can rival the property sector.
That makes sense. So pet owners, they're a happy bunch in China. Population planners are not, though. They're probably viewing this trend with trepidation. And like we heard one of your interviewees say, she has no desire to have kids. So then where does this leave the country's demographic dilemma? It's an aging country. There are not enough babies to replace the elderly.
I suppose it's a problem that's facing all countries. They're reaching developed status. South Korea is facing it. Japan is facing it. And as it gets more expensive to live, people just have fewer kids, right? It's perfectly understandable. You need money to raise kids. And you only have 2 parents to earn it. I don't have kids, but I can imagine. I mean, they're an expensive affair. So no one wants to raise kids in squalor, right, below their current standard of living. Two working parents. So unless you have help at home, then it makes a difference, right? So many couples just decide to keep their standard of living and not have kids, right? And China's birth rate is currently hovering around 1.18. That means for every 10 pairs in adults or 20 adults, only 12 kids are replacing them, right? In Shanghai, it's even worse, given it's more developed than the rest of China. The problem is, or rather the birth rate is hovering around 0.6. That means for every 20 adults in the room, there are only 6 babies to replace them. So you really see that, the more developed you are, even within China, right, the various areas, when you compare them, the more developed you are, the less kids people have. Unbreakable trend, a big trend, is very hard to reverse. It's the same problem with Singapore and many other developed countries, right? You can do all sorts of things to make it easier for parents to encourage the birth rate to kind of creep up, but it's unlikely to move the needle enough to reverse overall trends. And the only way out really for these countries is immigration, right? There's still a lot of people to raise up to middle-class living standards, especially in the rural areas, in the smaller towns. Even within Shanghai itself, as a country, they do want to avoid getting old before getting rich. And it is a tricky problem with no easy answers. I mean, for one, banning pets isn't going to make much of a difference. They did raise the retirement age recently, not a popular move for sure. It's inevitable. It's quite critical for China, given that their retirement fund work on a system of the current workers paying for the current retirees. So they need to increase the working population in order to keep up with the retirement payments. And mind you, retirees do have a good life here, right? It's even better that if you are a woman, right? For example, if I was a woman in China, I would already be retired, receiving monthly payments, I wouldn't be working. So the government pretty much did the only thing it could do to make the whole thing sustainable, which is to raise the retirement age, since there's no way for them to really turn the tide on people having kids, or for that matter, not having kids.
Yeah, it's a really tough predicament for officials, no doubt about it. I was really looking forward to this chat, and you did not disappoint, Yew Guan. Thank you so much for sharing your experience today.
You're welcome.
A reminder to all of you that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can check out Yew Guan's stories. They're all on YouTube and on CNA.Asia. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Thanks very much for your company.